You have 24 hours. What is that? Yeah, I know it's live. That's why I hit the broadcast button. So the exam will be similar to the previous two, except it will be 60 multiple choice instead of 30. So bring a pencil. It will cover everything on the course outline. So all the modules and the readings. There are not a lot of readings. And I'm not asking specific questions on the readings, but they will help you understand the content. Let's see. All right. About half the final is the new material since the last exam. About a quarter is material that was from the first exam, and about a quarter is material that was from the second exam. Okay, one thing that's nice about the new material is it kind of pulls it all together. So, you know, economics is cumulative, and I guess what that means is if I just gave you an exam on the last 3 modules, it would still effectively test the whole course, but I didn't think of that. So you guys all have appointments to come tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to seeing how you do. So what questions do you have about the exam or the content or anything else like that?
You have my questions.
I do.
But if others have questions, that's fine.
So if nobody else speaks, we can jump to your questions.
Okay.
I was kind of wondering about, I understand kind of the distinction between a soft peg and a hard peg. But I was wondering if, I don't know, I kind of understand. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
And I've gone over the material.
Okay. We're not doing that module, so it won't be on the test.
Oh.
So we're doing the trade stuff, the globalization and trade, but not the exchange in international finance.
Oh, okay.
So I'm glad you asked the question.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, let me go on to some of Rose's questions.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really confusing me is the labor section. Just determining the amount of labor and how perfect versus imperfect determines that, and then how they determine wage from that.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay.
So the first question that you asked was average costs, marginal costs in the short run and versus the long run. That is easier than it sounds. Okay, let's forget about fixed costs because they're sort of the aberration. Average costs always look like U-shapes. They're upside down, they're upward facing parabolas, so they look like a smile. That's true of average total cost, and it's also true of average variable cost. Average variable cost, of course, is below average total cost because it's only part of the total. Marginal costs always look like Nike signs, okay? So they decrease and then they increase. The decreasing part is not really that important because no firm would ever operate there since it's below the shutdown point. So marginal costs are Nike signs or check marks, and the marginal cost curve intersects each of the average variable and average total cost curves at the minimum point of the smile. Okay, so you should be able to draw all 3 of those curves just without even thinking. You know, you got the average total cost smile, you've got the average variable cost smile under it, and then you can just draw the marginal cost curve in. Those are short run curves. Okay. In the long run, it's possible to have decreasing long run average costs, which we call economies of scale. It's possible to have increasing long run average costs, which we call diseconomies of scale. Okay. It is rare to have increasing long run average costs. So most long run average cost curves look sort of like an L. There's the downward sloping part of the curve and then a flat part after that. Okay. Remember, economies of scale means bigger companies have an advantage because they can produce their product more cheaply and therefore they can undercut the price of their competitors. Economies of scale, if they exist, are a barrier to entry because they allow existing firms to get bigger than new firms coming in. Mm-hmm. Okay. One thing that determines a market structure is the extent to which there are economies of scale. If, say, demand for the product is such so that...
Hey, Mike.
Hello, everybody. Sorry I'm late. Got sidetracked.
It happens. You know, I take back everything I said about you.
Oh, thank you.
Actually, what I said about you was I thought you were coming tonight.
Yeah.
Okay. So where the long run average cost curve hits bottom, where it hits its minimum point, is really important. Okay. That point is actually called the minimum efficient scale. What that means is what level of output is the lowest amount of output that you can produce and still reach the bottom of the long run average cost curve. Okay. If that output level is only 2 or 3 times the market demand, then what that means is only 2 or 3 firms are going to be able to exist in the market in the long run. Okay. So big economies of scale lead to oligopoly because big economies of scale, which is what I was just describing, are only going to allow for a small number of firms to be competitive in the industry. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that all of this stuff is related. Mm-hmm. Okay. Most of the time, well, the way I think about the long run and the short run is we operate in the short run. We plan for the long run. Okay. All right. Now, where's the long run average variable cost curve? This is a little quiz for you guys. And where's the long run fixed cost curve?
Isn't everything variable in the long run?
Everything is variable, so there is no such thing as a long run average fixed cost curve. And what that means is the long run average cost curve is the long run variable cost curve, right? There's only one curve in the long run because everything is variable. Okay? So you plan for the long run. You plan, you estimate what you think your demand is going to be, and then you build or lease the right size factory to supply that demand. Once you sign the lease, you're now in the short run. You're stuck with the factory for the life of the lease, right? You may have either overestimated or underestimated demand. And if so, what that means is your short run average costs and your short run marginal costs are going to be higher than you expected. Okay. Hopefully you're close. When your lease runs out, then you can move to a new factory. If demand has been and continues to be higher than you thought it was going to be, then maybe you say, okay, we're going to move to a bigger factory. Once you make that, when you're planning, that's the long run. Once you make the move and sign the new lease, you're back in a new short run curve or short run situation.
So essentially, it's a cycle.
Right.
Unless you own the facility and own the property right out.
Right. And then you know, what you can do is you sell the factory and buy a new one, either bigger or smaller. Okay. But presumably you're not going to do that, you know, a month after you moved into the new factory, because you're going to give it some time. And that during that time, while you're in the existing factory, you're in a short run. So there are many, many short runs that correspond to the long run. In the long run, you can choose any set of short run curves that you want to, right? Because you can choose any capital stock, any size factory that you want. You know, when you're young, you have lots of options.
Yep.
Okay. And
lots of long run costs.
Well, then as you make decisions, you know, you foreclose other options, which is not good or bad. It's just a fact, right?
It's easy to see that now.
Right. I didn't see it much when I was 18 or 19.
No, neither did I.
I'm sure Rose did. She's smart like that.
I would venture to say that the other two probably haven't thought about that either. What's going to happen when they're 50?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Even Rose thinks that's old.
No, I turned 30 last week.
Ouch. Oh, that hurt.
I remember the 30s. They were a good decade.
Good so far. See how tomorrow goes.
Yep. All right, let's go on to another question. Tom, Mike, do you have any questions that you want us to address?
No, not really.
Okay, that's fine.
Unless there was something that you thought maybe to share with the group that I brought up in the email.
Not really.
Okay.
But Rose sent a list, so we're working down her list.
It's only like 2 or 3 things.
Oh, thanks, Rose.
It's not a huge list.
Show us up.
It's like 2 or 3
Rose,
things.
you're providing a service to everyone else.
Just confused on a few things.
It's okay. You know, I guarantee you that not only everyone else in this Hangout, but everyone else who watches the video is going to be really glad that you raised those questions. Okay? All right. Besides, you're playing the mom role here.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Calculating marginal labor value of the value of the marginal labor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The question is, how does a firm figure out its demand for labor, its demand for employees? Okay. So if you think about a graph and you have number of employees on the horizontal, on the x-axis, and you think value of the employees on the vertical axis, okay, demand for labor, demand for any number of workers is going to be the value of those workers to the firm. What that means more precisely is how many dollars in revenue will an employee's production or other work bring into the firm, okay? And that's what we call the value of the marginal product of labor, okay? So there's 2 things that go into this. There's the marginal product of one more worker. How much additional output, in other words, will we be able to produce if we hire that one more worker? And then there's the, what is that additional output worth to us? Okay, so if we are selling our output in a perfectly competitive market so that we can sell all we want to at the going market price, then we multiply the marginal product of one more worker times the price of that output. And what that does is it translates physical quantities of output into dollars of revenue for the firm. Okay. Those dollars then represent what the worker is worth to the firm. And they also signal us the maximum that the firm is willing to pay for you. If you're bringing in $20 an hour, they won't pay more than 20, right? In fact, they probably won't even pay 20. They would rather pay 10 or 15, right? Because they have other expenses to cover, and they're also in business to earn a profit. If they pay every worker exactly what they're worth, they won't be able to pay their other bills, and you know, the firm won't stay in business very long. Okay, so another name for the value of the marginal product of labor, the value of an additional worker, is the marginal revenue product. Okay, so it's the same basic scenario. You hire a worker, they have some marginal product, the firm sells that additional output, and the change in their revenue, the change in their total revenue, which is marginal revenue, is the additional dollars hiring the worker brings into the firm. Okay, most firms we know do not sell their output in perfectly competitive markets. Most firms have a little bit of market power, which is good and bad. The good news is that means firms have some ability to raise the market price and not lose all their customers. Okay, some people will stick with Crest toothpaste. Some people will keep going to McDonald's even when they raise their price. So that's the good news. The bad news is if the company wants to sell more output, the only way they can do that is by cutting the price. Okay, so what that means is when you hire an additional worker or when you're considering hiring them, they're going to produce some additional output. You're going to have to cut your price to sell that output. And so what really matters is the marginal revenue that additional worker brings in. And that's what we mean by marginal revenue product. So if the value of the marginal product is price times marginal product of labor, the marginal revenue product is marginal revenue times marginal product of labor. If you can only remember a few things, then remember marginal revenue product, because in the case of perfect competition, the price and the marginal revenue are always the same. So MR times MP will always work at determining the demand for labor. And I just got a message from Tiffany. Let me get back to her briefly. Where's that one? No, not that one. All I need to do is say yes. Tiffany. All right. Does that help, Rose?
I think so. Sorry.
No, what I was going to say is the punchline is, assuming that the firm is in a competitive labor market, and competitive labor markets are more common than competitive output markets, assuming a firm operates in a competitive labor market, they can hire all the workers they want to of a given type, as long as they're willing to pay the going pay rate, right? So given their demand for labor, which is the marginal revenue product, they keep hiring workers as long as the value of one more worker to the firm exceeds the cost they have to pay in terms of the salary package. Okay. Or to put it a little bit differently, the market wage rate is a horizontal line, which essentially represents the firm's supply of labor. So they operate where the demand for labor and the supply of labor intersect. That's the equilibrium quantity of workers. Now I interrupted you, so.
Oh, that's okay. So just to clarify, if it's an imperfect competition, it's the marginal product of labor times the marginal revenue of labor?
It's the marginal product of labor times the marginal revenue the firm gets from selling those workers additional output.
Okay.
Okay. So you need to keep track of two things. You need to keep track of what's the market structure when they sell their output, and what's the market structure when they buy their inputs like labor.
Okay.
And I think that leads into the next question that you asked. Oh, how do the no, that's not it. Sorry. We'll hold off on that, the third question, until we get this figured out. Okay, so it's also possible that employers can have market power, right? If there's only one firm where you're willing to work, then they have power over you. They can lowball you. And if you really want to work there, you'll take the estimate, right? You'll take the offer. So if there is only one employer in the job market that you're interested in, we call that monopsony, like monopoly, but sunny, which means it's in the labor market. One employer. Okay. Not surprisingly, monopsonists pay lower wages because they can. All right. If there are only a small number of employers, we call that oligopsony, just like oligopoly, right? So if you have market power on the employer side, then what you do is you pay a lower wage, but you also hire fewer workers. If you work through the graph, it's got to work out that way. So market power for employers is a double bad, because there are fewer jobs and the jobs pay less. Mike, you're scratching your head.
It wasn't because I was confused. I'm fine.
This should be right up your alley, Mr. HR guy.
Oh yeah, it makes sense. And I was going through my mind about businesses and hiring and so forth.
Sure.
It all makes sense in that respect. As long as the company's making money, they'll hire employees to produce more product. But as soon as the product is no longer wanted, then they start cutting back. So it's a cycle going back and forth.
Yes, it is.
Unless you're successful and you're branded and you've got the big name Nike, Under Armour, and so forth. So
right. Okay, moving on to Rose's last question. This last question covered about a third of the course, by the way. So she knows how to pick them. How do the different types of firm, perfectly competitive, monopolistic, oligopoly, monopolistically competitive, determine price and quantity? How do they determine wages? Okay. So the short answer is.
Yeah, I guess I just mean like the key. What's the key thing we need to know for each of those?
Okay. Except for perfectly competitive firms, which means almost every firm. They have a downward sloping demand curve. The marginal revenue curve is under the demand curve. It starts at the same point as demand does on the y-axis and intersects the x-axis halfway from 0 to where demand intersects the x-axis. Okay. Then you draw the marginal cost curve in, the Nike sign. The firm is always going to maximize profits if it chooses the level of output to sell, to produce and sell, where MR equals MC. Then once you have that quantity, you draw the dotted line up from that quantity until it hits the demand curve, because the demand curve shows what's the most that people are willing to pay for that quantity.
So for monopolistic competition and oligopoly, I know it's the MR equals MC, but to choose the price, then it's always the same corresponding point on the demand curve. You
take the quantity and you go up to the demand curve, correct?
Okay. That's what I was getting.
The same rule will work for perfect competition. It's just a simpler graph.
Okay.
Because MR and demand are the same. Okay. The wage rate is determined the way we just described.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, you can be a monopoly when you sell your output, like Dominion, Virginia Power is a monopoly. Okay, but the same firm can get its labor in a perfectly competitive market. So if you're a secretary and you work for Dominion, you earn what a secretary earns anywhere else. All right?
All right, thank you.
John, you there? Just wave. Taking it all in. Good. All right, other questions?
I had one. Can you go over how to figure out the best option in the prisoner's dilemma, and then how to do the Nash equation?
No, I can't. Well, I can, but it's not on the final, so don't worry about game theory.
Ah,
Okay.
It's good to know. What else is not on the final?
nice question.
I don't remember.
How about what is on the final?
I don't remember that either.
I
Supply
don't
and demand, I think.
Is there anything we should really specifically focus on for the final?
Yeah.
It covers like 10 questions.
The important stuff.
She sounds like somebody in the White House press room asking questions.
Oh, I'm taking that really personally.
Can we use a calculator though? Seriously?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
I have to say, I design all of these questions so that you can do them with your fingers, do the math with your fingers. But if you want a calculator, that's totally okay.
Okay.
And can we bring like a notebook to scratch things? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. Bring a notebook, bring your coffee, bring your sandwich if you want.
And I'm bringing beer.
Yeah, absolutely. At least one of us is old enough to drink.
Yeah.
Actually, Rose has admitted it, so she's old enough to drink.
yes.
Rose, what part of Pennsylvania are you from?
My parents are from Somerset County.
Where's that?
It's about an hour and a half south of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the big intersection.
Mm.
So that's not really close to where Jen lives or is from.
No,
I thought maybe if you were in like northeast Pennsylvania or something.
no, I don't think it's very close.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
I don't think so.
Well, I'll be in by 9 tomorrow, except for Rose. Rose knows I'll be in by 8:30.
Oh, it wasn't just me, was it? That was someone else.
There is somebody else.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. You know?
Oh, I have one.
Okay, sure.
What type of markets are typically like imperfect or perfect as far as like oligopoly, monopoly is concerned?
What do you mean perfect or imperfect?
Like as far as the really?
Any market structure besides perfect competition is perfectly competitive.
Okay.
Okay. So imperfect competition is just kind of a catch-all phrase that means every firm has at least some market power. It can be just a little bit, but at least they have some.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Other questions?
No, I'm all set here.
All right. Well, then I will see you guys tomorrow.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. All right. Let's stop the broadcast.